Act like you know me, she pleaded, unaware the stranger was a billionaire who would flip her life upside down. Zara's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the marble table, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. The restaurant's warm lighting suddenly felt suffocating, and every shadow seemed to hide the face she'd been running from for months. "Please," she whispered to the man in the simple black hoodie, her voice barely audible above the gentle clatter of silverware and murmured conversations. "Just, act like you know me. If you're loving this story of unexpected encounters and hidden truths, smash that like button, subscribe for more incredible tales, and share this with your friends who believe in the power of love conquering all. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had a moment that changed everything?" Let's dive into Zara's world. She was just a waitress trying to survive in a city that chewed up dreamers and spat them out broken. Every morning, she'd tie her apron with hands that still shook from memories of bruises that had finally faded, serving coffee to people who looked right through her. Until tonight, when her past walked through those glass doors and threatened to destroy the fragile peace she'd built. The stranger looked up from his untouched pasta, dark eyes studying her face with an intensity that should have frightened her. Instead, something in his gaze, a recognition of pain, perhaps, made her feel seen for the first time in months. "Of course I know you," Damien said smoothly, his voice carrying just enough warmth to sound convincing. He stood, towering over her petite frame, and gently placed his hand on her lower back. "I was wondering when you'd finally notice me sitting here." Zara's breath caught as she felt the solid warmth of his presence behind her. She hadn't expected him to be so convincing. So protective. The way he positioned himself, she realized he was deliberately blocking her from view of the restaurant's entrance. "Thank you," she breathed, her voice thick with relief and unshed tears. "Don't thank me yet," he murmured, his lips barely moving. "Your friend at the door looks like he's not buying it." She risked a glance over her shoulder and saw Marcus, her ex-fiancé, scanning the dining room with those cold, calculating eyes that had once made her feel like prey. His expensive suit couldn't hide the predator underneath, the man who'd controlled every aspect of her life until she'd found the courage to run. "He's not my friend," she whispered. "I figured." Damien's hand moved to her shoulder, a gesture so natural it almost fooled her into believing they really did know each other. "What's your name?" "Zara." "Zara." He repeated it like he was tasting something sweet. "I'm Damien. And right now, we're going to walk out of here together like we've done it 1,000 times before." She nodded, not trusting her voice. There was something about this stranger, this Damien, that made her feel safer than she had in years. Maybe it was the way he'd stepped into her crisis without hesitation, or the careful way he guided her toward the back exit, his body still shielding her from Marcus's searching gaze. "My car's out back," he said quietly as they slipped through the kitchen, past startled cooks who knew Zara but had never seen her with anyone like this man who moved with quiet confidence. The cool night air hit her face like a blessing as they stepped into the alley. Zara finally allowed herself to breathe, her shoulders sagging with relief. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, turning to face him properly for the first time. In the dim light from the restaurant's back door, she could see him more clearly. Strong jawline, dark hair that looked like he'd been running his fingers through it, and those eyes, intelligent, guarded, but kind. He was handsome in an understated way, the kind of man who didn't need to announce his presence to command attention. "You don't need to thank me," Damien replied, studying her face with that same intense focus. "But you might want to tell me what I just helped you escape from." Zara wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how thin her waitress uniform was against the night chill. "Someone I used to know. Someone I thought I'd left behind. And now? Now I'm not sure anywhere is far enough." The words slipped out before she could stop them, revealing more vulnerability than she'd intended. Damien was quiet for a long moment, and she wondered if she'd said too much. Strangers didn't usually want to hear about other people's problems, especially problems that involved dangerous ex-fiancés and midnight escapes. "Where do you live?" he asked finally. "About 6 blocks from here." I usually walk. Not tonight. He pulled out his phone, and she caught a glimpse of the screen, expensive, sleek, the kind of device that cost more than she made in 2 months. I'm calling you a cab. I can't afford. I'm paying. His tone brooked no argument. And Zara? If he shows up at your work again, call me. He handed her a business card, plain white with just a phone number printed in simple black font. As the taxi pulled up, Zara looked at the card in her hand, then back at the man who'd just saved her from a confrontation she wasn't ready to face. Why? She asked. Why did you help me? Damien's expression softened, and for just a moment, she saw something raw and unguarded in his eyes. Because everyone deserves to feel safe. The taxi door closed between them, but as they drove away, Zara found herself looking back at the figure standing in the alley, hands in his pockets, watching until she was out of sight. She had no idea that the man in the simple hoodie owned half the city's skyline, or that her desperate plea had just set in motion a love story that would challenge everything they both thought they knew about trust, truth, and second chances. The weeks that followed felt like living in a dream Zara was afraid to wake up from. Damien appeared at the restaurant 3 more times, always sitting in her section, always leaving tips that made her manager raise eyebrows and her coworkers whisper. But it wasn't just the money, it was the way he listened when she talked about her mother's medical bills, the way he remembered she preferred tea over coffee, the way he made her laugh for the first time in months. You're different, she told him one evening as they walked along the waterfront after her shift. The city lights danced on the dark water, and for a moment, she could almost forget about the cramped apartment she shared with 2 roommates, the stack of unpaid bills on her dresser, the constant fear that Marcus might find her again. Different how? Damien asked, his hands buried deep in the pockets of that same black hoodie he always wore. You don't look at me like I'm broken. The words came out softer than she intended, carried away by the evening breeze. He stopped walking, turning to face her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Maybe because you're not. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, a possibility neither of them had dared to name. When he reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, Zara felt her carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. I should tell you something, she whispered, but before she could continue, his phone buzzed insistently. The spell broke as he glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening. I have to take this, he said, stepping away. She caught fragments of his conversation, something about board meetings and quarterly reports, words that seemed oddly formal for someone who spent his evenings walking with waitresses. The next morning, Zara arrived at work to find her manager, Janet, practically vibrating with excitement. Your hospital called, Janet announced, waving a piece of paper. Your mother's bill. It's been paid. In full. Anonymous donor. Zara's knees nearly buckled. The bill had been crushing her for months, $37,000 for her mother's emergency surgery, a sum that might as well have been $37 million for all her ability to pay it. That's impossible, she breathed. Honey, impossible, just bought your mama a clean slate. That evening, when Damien appeared at his usual table, Zara could barely contain herself. She slid into the booth across from him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. It was you, wasn't it? She whispered. My mother's hospital bill. His silence was answer enough. Damien, I can't accept this. It's too much, I don't even know how I could ever. You don't need to pay me back, he said quietly. Some things aren't about money. But $37,000 is nothing. The words slipped out before he could stop them, and Zara's expression shifted, confusion clouding her features. Nothing? Damien, that's more money than I'll see in 2 years. How is that nothing to you? He looked away, and she saw something like panic flicker across his face. I just meant. I wanted to help. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Over the next few days, Zara found herself noticing things she'd overlooked before, the expensive watch he tried to hide under his sleeve, the way he never seemed concerned about money, the phone calls he took in hushed, urgent tones. The truth came crashing down 3 weeks later at a charity gala Damien had invited her to attend. She'd borrowed a dress from her roommate, spent her last $20 on shoes that pinched her feet, and felt completely out of place among the glittering crowd of Manhattan's elite. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed across the ballroom, "please welcome Damien Blake, CEO of Blake Technologies." The spotlight found him at their table, and Zara watched in stunned silence as the man she'd been falling in love with, the man in hoodies who walked her home and listened to her dreams, transformed before her eyes into someone else entirely. Someone who belonged in this world of crystal chandeliers and $1,000 plates. "Blake Technologies," she whispered, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. You're him. The billionaire. The one who's always in the business magazines." Damien's face was pale in the harsh spotlight. "Zara, I can explain." But she was already standing, her chair scraping against the marble floor. The sound seemed to echo through the suddenly quiet ballroom as hundreds of eyes turned to watch the waitress in the borrowed dress flee from the billionaire's table. The next morning, her phone buzzed with notifications she'd never experienced before. Her name was trending on social media, her face splashed across gossip blogs with headlines that made her stomach turn: "Gold digger waitress snares tech billionaire," and "From rags to riches, the Cinderella story that's too good to be true." But the worst was yet to come. By afternoon, a different story emerged, one that made her blood run cold. Photos of her with Marcus, old police reports, court documents that painted her as a thief who'd stolen money from her ex-fiancé before disappearing into the night. The narrative was simple and devastating. She was a con artist who'd targeted Damien Blake, just like she'd targeted Marcus before him. Her phone rang constantly, reporters, bloggers, strangers who'd somehow gotten her number. She stopped answering after the fifth person asked her how much money she'd gotten from the Blake heir. When Damien finally appeared at her apartment building 3 days later, Zara almost didn't let him up. But she needed to hear him say it. Needed to hear him choose his billion-dollar empire over the broken waitress who dared to believe in fairy tales. "The board is pressuring me," he said without preamble, standing in her tiny living room like an expensive suit in a thrift store. "The publicity is affecting stock prices. They want me to make a statement distancing myself from this situation." "From me," she corrected, her voice hollow. "They want you to distance yourself from me. Zara, you have to understand." "I understand perfectly." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the summer heat. "I understand that I was stupid enough to think someone like you could actually care about someone like me. That's not. Just go, Damien." The words came out broken, barely above a whisper. "Go back to your world. I'll go back to mine." He stood there for a long moment, and she hoped, he might fight for them. Might choose love over money, truth over reputation. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing in her cramped apartment with the taste of betrayal bitter on her tongue and the sound of her own heart breaking echoing in the silence. 6 months later, Zara had built a new life from the ashes of her old one. The small community center in Portland smelled of paint and possibility, filled with the laughter of children who didn't care that their art teacher had once been splashed across tabloid headlines. Here, surrounded by easels and bright watercolors, she'd found something she'd never expected: peace. "Miss Zara, look what I made." 8-year-old Maya held up a painting of a butterfly emerging from its cocoon, wings spread wide in brilliant blues and purples. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Zara said, crouching down to Maya's level. "Tell me about it. It's like you said, sometimes we have to go through dark places before we can fly." The words hit deeper than Maya could have known. Zara had shared that lesson during their first class, never imagining how prophetic it would become. Her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown New York number. She'd stopped answering those months ago, but something made her hesitate this time. "Hello? Miss Martinez? This is Eleanor Blake. I believe you knew my son." Zara's breath caught. Damien's mother, she'd seen her in society photos, elegant and sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who could command boardrooms and charity galas with equal ease. "Mrs. Blake, I'm dying," Eleanor said matter-of-factly. "Cancer. And before I go, I need to meet the woman who changed my son's eyes. I don't understand. He's been different since you left. Quieter. More human, somehow. I've watched him build walls around his heart for 32 years, but you made him remember what it felt like to be real." 3 days later, Zara found herself on a plane back to New York, her hands trembling as the city skyline came into view. Eleanor Blake was nothing like she'd expected. Smaller, frilier, but with eyes that missed nothing. "He doesn't know you're here," Eleanor said as they sat in her penthouse overlooking Central Park. "He's been looking for you, you know. Hired investigators, called in favors. But you disappeared quite thoroughly." "I had to," Zara whispered. "The things they said about me were lies." Eleanor's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "I know because I had my own investigators dig deeper. Your ex-fiancé, Marcus, he was quite the piece of work, wasn't he?" Zara's hands clenched in her lap. "What did you find?" "The money you supposedly stole. It was yours. Settlement money from a lawsuit against the company where he assaulted you. Money that was legally owed to you, but that he intercepted and kept." Eleanor leaned forward, her gaze intense. "You didn't steal anything, dear. You took back what was already yours." The room spun around Zara. "That's impossible. The police report was filed by a man with connections to some very unsavory people. People who knew how to make paperwork say whatever they wanted it to say." Eleanor's expression hardened. "But here's the part that will interest you most, the law firm that helped him bury the truth. They're on retainer with Blake Technologies." The words hit like a physical blow. Damien knew. No. But his company's lawyers did. They kept it quiet to protect their other client, your ex-corporate politics at its ugliest. Eleanor reached across the table, covering Zara's shaking hands with her own. "My son fell in love with you, and his own company helped destroy that love to protect their reputation." That evening, Zara stood outside the community center where she'd heard Damien was volunteering. Through the window, she could see him ladling soup into bowls, his expensive suit replaced by jeans and a simple t-shirt. He looked tired, older somehow, but when he smiled at an elderly homeless man, she saw the same kindness that had made her fall for him in the first place. She almost turned away. Almost convinced herself that some bridges were too burned to rebuild. But then she remembered Maya's butterfly, emerging from darkness into light. The bell chimed as she pushed open the door, and Damien looked up from the serving line. The ladle slipped from his fingers, clattering to the floor as their eyes met across the crowded room. Zara. Her name was a prayer on his lips. "Hello, Damien." They stood frozen for a moment, the noise of the soup kitchen fading around them. Then he was moving, crossing the room with quick, desperate steps. "I looked for you," he said when he reached her, his voice rough with emotion. "I looked everywhere." "I know. Your mother told me." "My mother?" His eyes widened. "You spoke to." "She's dying, Damien. And she wanted me to know the truth about Marcus, about the money, about your company's lawyers." Zara's voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "She wanted me to know that you never betrayed me. Your world did, but you didn't." His face crumpled, and she saw the weight he'd been carrying, guilt, regret, love that had nowhere to go. "I should have fought for you," he whispered. "I should have told them all to go to hell and chosen you instead. You were protecting your family's legacy. I understand that now." "No." He stepped closer, his hands hovering near her face as if he was afraid she might disappear again. "I was protecting myself. From feeling too much, from risking too much. From loving someone so completely that losing them would destroy me. And now? Now I know that losing you already destroyed me. His thumb brushed away a tear she didn't realize had fallen. I stepped down from the board. Cut ties with the law firm. Started a foundation in your name, for women escaping abuse. Damien. You don't owe me anything, he said quickly. Not forgiveness, not love, not a second chance. I just needed you to know that you changed me. That loving you, even for those few weeks, made me a better man. Around them, the soup kitchen continued its quiet work of feeding the hungry, offering warmth to the cold. It was such a different world from the glittering galas and boardrooms where they'd first collided, but somehow it felt more real, more true. I never stopped loving you, Zara whispered, the words barely audible above the gentle clatter of dishes and murmured conversations. Even after everything. Especially after everything. She reached up, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Because I finally understand what you meant that first night, everyone deserves to feel safe. Even billionaires who are afraid of their own hearts. When he kissed her, it tasted like second chances and hard-won wisdom, like love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. The volunteers around them pretended not to notice, but she caught more than one smile, more than one knowing nod. So what happens now? Damien asked when they finally broke apart. Now we start over, Zara said, her hand finding his. No secrets this time. No lies. Just us, figuring out how to build something real. I'd like that, he said, and his smile was the same one that had made her feel safe in a restaurant alley all those months ago. I'd like that very much. As they walked out into the New York evening, hand in hand, Zara thought about butterflies and second chances, about love that survives betrayal and truth that sets hearts free. Sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the words, "Act like you know me," and end with the discovery that maybe, just maybe, you always did. Love isn't about perfection, it's about choosing each other through the storms. Zara and Damien learned that real wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the courage to be vulnerable, to forgive, and to fight for what matters most. Sometimes we must lose ourselves completely to find who we're truly meant to become, and sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the simplest plea for help.